So the first question, you're all here this evening because you think you might like to do a PhD. And the first question that presents itself is, well, why? No, not quite that way. Why do you want to do a PhD? Why might you want to do a PhD? And there are a lot of answers to this question, and they're probably quite individual in many cases. But some big things that come up immediately. You have a really strong interest in advanced research. You've really enjoyed research and writing at the undergraduate and MA levels. You've identified some things that you really want to think about further. You'd like to take a period of time to focus on research, and a PhD seems like a really great opportunity to do that. And for sure it is. At the heart of the PhD is your own research, and it is an opportunity to pursue that type of interest that is really unrivaled. Once you're finished with the PhD, you will look back on it with fondness, I assure you. The second big reason is that you have a strong passion for art or architectural history or conservation. We do offer PhDs in all three fields, and that is obviously a really important issue. If you're going to commit this period of your life and perhaps the career that comes after it to this type of research, you presumably are extremely passionate about the subject, about the opportunity that further research in these fields presents, not only for you, but perhaps for society as a whole, for your career. Perhaps you want to teach, perhaps you want to work in museums, you want to work in public history or in a preservation office, you'd like to work as a conservator, whatever it is. This really is a sort of driving energy for you. You probably have a strong belief in the significance of your subject. You know, we sort of joke that every PhD, the first chapter starts talking about how this sort of very obscure thing is absolutely so important and completely changes our understanding of the field. But actually, that is both true and really necessary, I think, to do a PhD. Scholarship ultimately is a collective effort. Although we spend a lot of time in the library and the archive on our own, knowledge, and especially historic knowledge, is really built brick by brick, one scholar at a time, adding a piece, adding a piece, adding a piece. And while when you say to your friends or your family or someone you meet over dinner, well, this is what I'm working on, they may say, doesn't that seem awfully small? The truth of the matter is, within the field, it takes on great significance. And the questions that it opens onto, whether they are historic, political, social, personal, can often really not only be personally life-changing, but also really make a great difference in not only people's appreciation of art and architecture, but in society more largely. And finally, you probably have professional aspirations requiring a PhD, or you may. That's not necessarily so. Some of you may simply wish to do a PhD because it's a really wonderful opportunity to do research. And you may feel as though what happens after the PhD is not necessarily linked to the PhD, that you'd be happy to go on to do a wide variety of things. And indeed, there are people with Courtauld degrees doing a huge number of different careers, not just art history and curating. But on the other hand, if you wish to be a professor, if you wish to have an advanced curatorial role or a leadership role in the arts or other nonprofits, all of these careers increasingly want both the sort of in-depth engagement with the material, but also the in-depth understanding of how research and the field works that often comes with having done a PhD. So those things, career and study, are very often linked. Now, the next question, now that you've decided that you want to do a PhD, is what makes a good PhD topic? You know, the first thing, of course, is someone else can't have done the same thing. So that's an original contribution to knowledge. The most important standard ultimately of a PhD, a worthy PhD topic and a passing PhD dissertation, is that it makes an original contribution to the knowledge of the field, that it expands our understanding of particular questions, that it does so on the basis of original research that you have conducted. That is not just sort of collating what other people have written, but going out and using the archive or the site or the original work of art, or whatever it is, all of these things in concert to articulate new understandings of a subject. How do you identify such a topic? Well, it may be that you already have, or that you're trying to do that. You may be currently in an MA and just getting your feet wet in the sort of field that you think that you want to work in, or you may have been doing research or working in this field for quite some time, and you've started to notice that there are places where either people really, you think, have gotten it wrong, they've misinterpreted it, or they've just missed a really big question that you think is out there that really needs to be addressed. It may be taking on a new perspective. It may be articulating the voices of people or works of art or cultures that haven't been articulated before. It may be correcting a misreading of a work of art or a building or a text or whatever that really changes our understanding of the field. It tends to be a fairly big question, but not absolutely enormous. How do you find the right size? Usually you start to talk to a potential supervisor and it sort of breathes in and out until you find about the right pitch. But the most important thing is that you begin to have a feel for the gap in existing scholarship. That thing where you say, boy, how have you continually missed out on that big question? You know, for me, it had to do with the difference in how different emperors worked. For you, it may have to do with a painting that has come to newly to light and totally changes our understanding of everything around it, or a wing of the building that was destroyed, but now you've discovered it and it changes how we understand it. Or it may simply have to do with something that nobody has ever studied before. In any case, really essential to that is going to be developing a sense of your field, a knowledge of the existing literature and therefore what's out there to be done, that is instrumental both to articulating a project, to developing a project, and to being really ready to take on the PhD. And finally, I'd recommend a topic that is situated strategically relative to developments in the discipline. It's really important that we have an understanding of our own discipline. So like I said, I work in early modern China. You may work in the Byzantine Mediterranean or in contemporary Singapore. But whatever it is, it's really important, in addition to your specific area, to have a sense of the big shifts in art history, to understand where art history is going, and architectural, I use art history here as a sort of shorthand for art history, architectural history, conservation, but to understand wherever your chosen discipline is headed, what the big trends in the last several years have been, or the last decade, what you think the next big thing might be. And I say that for a variety of reasons. The first is that you don't want to propose a topic that ends up feeling stale when you're finished, that was cutting edge 15 years ago or 20 years ago, but isn't now. You also want to be engaged in conversations with your peers. You want to go out and find that you really are engaged in what's making the field exciting, what's making the field change. And because wherever you start now, you will be finished in 4 to 5 years. The field will continue to evolve. So you want to be looking forward to what you think might be next, and to trying to think about how whatever your chosen discipline is, whatever your chosen subfield is, how it is that that's developing. This will help make sure that when you finish, you not only have a work of scholarship and a work of research that you're really proud of, that you're really excited about, but that you're also presenting a profile onto the market that is competitive, that has jobs available for it, that really is meeting the market where it needs to be met. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the types of things that might lead up to a decision to apply to the Courtauld. And I'll come to the application process a little later. I'm just going to look at my watch. A brief overview of how the degree at the Courtauld works. The degree of the Courtauld is what's considered to be a 3+1. There are 3 years of sort of core supervision, research and writing, and then a 4th year, an optional 4th year that students can and often do take, that is called the writing up year. When you finish your writing, you submit your dissertation for examination, you sit your viva, which is what is elsewhere called the defense of your examination. If your examiners say that there are a few revisions you need to do, which generally, there are some typos and some other things, you do that, and then you graduate. So we call that a 3+1. In your first year, you're required to be in London or near London, because the only required coursework that takes place during the Courthold PhD is a skills and methods seminar that happens during autumn, which is skills, and methods, which is spring term. And that meets once a week at Vernon Square, or right now we're meeting virtually, but I'm very hopeful that by next year we'll be back to meeting in person. You may be taking a language course or doing other types of study skills courses. Lots of students take paleography or Latin or a second research language. My students who often speak Chinese when they come in, then often take, say, Japanese to sort of get a second research language up and going, things like this. You may take other classes at the University of London, and all of this builds over the course of the year. You also meet with your supervisor quite regularly, at least twice a term during your first year, to discuss your research and progress. And your first year culminates in what's called the monitoring paper and the upgrade process. When you first arrive at the Courtauld, you're technically in an MPhil degree. At the end of the year, you've produced a research paper of about 10,000 words, which you present to your advisor and second reader. They have a discussion with you about it called the upgrade process, the monitoring process. And at the end of that, assuming that your work is of adequate quality, which it certainly will be, you are upgraded to the full PhD and you move on to year 2. Year 2 is a year in which many students spend extended periods of time overseas doing research in archives or museums. Some may get research grants that help facilitate that travel. They often continue their language and skills training either here or overseas. Some people begin to teach if they happen to be based in, if their research happens to be based in London and they can stay locally, then they'll begin to teach through TAing opportunities that are part of the Courthold BA. And then at the end of the year, there is again an annual monitoring process, which involves a meeting with your supervisor and advisor, as it did in the first year. But instead of an upgrade and a long paper, this year you give a short research presentation, about 10 or 15 minutes, to the other students and faculty members who work in your general area, whether that is Renaissance and Byzantine and medieval, which is sort of one group, the early modern, which is another group, or the modern contemporary group, which is the third major sort of period cluster that we have at the Courthold. Then finally, in year 3, it says here, somewhat optimistically, that you're completing and revising chapters. You're completing your research and certainly continuing your writing. Some students may, in fact, submit their dissertations by the end of the 3rd year, but it's quite often that it takes into the 4th year, which is absolutely no problem. The really big monitoring event this year is the 3rd year postgraduate symposium, which is the third, sorry, I've just had a visit from some short members of my family, which is the 3rd year postgraduate symposium. This is a public conference, and traditionally at the Courthold, we hold it in the late spring, in May. It's open, it's hosted by the Research Forum, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, and the sort of grand public of London is invited, and many, many people from around the art community in London come to hear the papers of advanced Courthold students because they really represent exciting new research in the field. And then you may also be preparing for submission and examination, as I said. Now, this year, you continue to be meeting quite regularly with your supervisor, maybe only once a term, maybe twice a term, depending on your needs. But by now, you're really a pretty independent researcher. You have a much better sense of your topic, probably, than your supervisor does. You, after all, have been researching it now for 3 years. You're really getting to be the lead expert or one of the lead experts in this particular field that you're working on. So you're largely organizing your own research time and your own research schedule and just checking in with your supervisor when you have things for them to read, when you have big research questions, when you need help with certain things. By year 4, for which I don't have a slide, again, you've largely weaned off of really regular supervision, though your supervisor is certainly still there to help when you need it. You'll be completing and revising your dissertation. You may be writing an article for publication in your free time, working on an exhibit, organizing a conference, speaking at conferences. All of these things start to pick up in the 3rd and 4th year as you begin the transition or preparing for the transition out of your PhD and into the post-PhD world, looking on the job market for your next opportunity, whatever that may be. Now I want to tell you a little bit about what life at the Courtauld is like. The Courtauld, and I say this from personal experience as someone who works in a field that has not been taught at the Courtauld before, and I had no previous contact with the Courtauld before I came to work here. The Courtauld is really one of the world's great centers of art historical and conservation research. And I can only say that again, it is one of the world's great centers of research in these fields. And at the heart of that status is our research community, is the fact that what we all do pretty much all the time is teach and research about art, architecture, conservation. And as a result, our research sort of flows through everything we do, from undergraduate students, for whom research is very important to the way their degree is conducted, straight through to the most senior faculty, who are all of us working on our research together and sharing that with each other at every opportunity. And the real center for that sharing is the Research Forum. And the Research Forum organizes a huge range of events that stretch from research clusters, which are little thematic groups made up of faculty and postgraduate students, PhD students like yourselves, who meet about a wide variety of subjects. You know, some of the thematic clusters are thinking about works on paper and the graphic work of art, on architecture, on transcultural connection in the early modern world, on the modern contemporary, on Gothic ivories, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, a huge, huge range of subjects that reflect both current research interests and, to be honest, historic research interests at the Courtauld, because in many cases, the Courtauld has, over the last century, nearly century, been at the heart of very major research movements in art history in the UK. These clusters run small group workshops, they run big conferences, they host one-off lectures, they facilitate PhD conversations, they do a huge variety of things. In a normal year, when we're not doing everything remotely, there's typically 1 to 2 research forum events a day, every day, 5 days a week. Throughout the academic year. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the activity. There is far more than you could do, but on the other hand, as a PhD student, we really hope you'll just dive in and do as much as you can. There are also a number of major research centers, probably at the moment, the most important of which is the Center for American Art, that is affiliated through the Research Forum. The Research Forum is also connected in some ways aligned with the Public Programs Department, which is a place where you can particularly work over the course of your degree. Public programs tend to be targeted towards the public, so they're really sort of translating our research and our teaching for a broader public audience, not as specialized a student body. And finally, the Research Forum hosts and helps coordinate mediations, which is the doctoral student, the PhD student community journal. It's a peer-reviewed journal, which is a place where people can have their research, people from within the community can have their research published while they're students here. There are also a number of other publication projects through the Research Forum, the most significant of which currently is a Courtauld imprint of digital publications that often rise out of research, major conferences that the Research Forum hosts and that faculty and student and PhD students tend to organize. So, with all that and much more, which I probably could tell you about, I want to tell you really briefly about the application process and the degree requirements. to apply and to be admitted to the Courthold PhD. For those of you who maybe, I don't know where all of you are attending from, and so the numbers that I'm about to describe are UK numbers, but if you're applying from a different context, a different educational context, we simply translate that whatever your scale is, and sometimes with the help of your referees. So don't worry if this feels out of whack with what you know at home. You need to have a master's in a relevant subject, because unlike the American PhD, the UK PhD and the Courtauld PhD is a dissertation only degree. There is no coursework except the skills and methods seminar. You need to have a 65 overall on your MA, which is roughly a mid-merit in the Courtauld scale, and at least a 70% or above in your dissertation or thesis, a long paper for which you've received a distinction mark at the MA level. You need to have identified a supervisor, and you need to have communicated with that supervisor. We have, as you'll have seen, a pre-application process, which I'll come to in just a moment, which is a way of reaching out to your supervisor and introducing them to your topic. They'll have a look at that, judge whether or not they feel that the relationship is a potentially good fit. They'll green light you to go on to the full application, at which time it's appropriate to be in touch with your potential supervisor to talk more about your topic. They'll probably be in touch with you as well. I mentioned that there is a pre-application deadline, and somewhat distressingly, you'll see that it says here the 15th of November, which is, I think, 2 days ago. If you haven't submitted a pre-application yet, but you'd like to this year, please do so as soon as possible, say by the end of this week. It won't be a problem to accept them up until the end of this week, but we really need to put you and your supervisor in contact with one another, because the program application deadline, which is the 14th of December, is racing up on us very quickly. So we really want to get you two connected so you can have an opportunity to talk more about the specifics of your topic. So then after you've submitted your full application, you'll be invited to interview. The interview is an opportunity when you'll speak with your supervisor and a second member of faculty for anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes usually, to discuss your topic, your research plans. They'll ask you to explain certain aspects a little bit more. They'll try to get a sense of your interests and your what directions you're heading in. And it's also a good opportunity for you to get a sense of your supervisor, to ask them some questions that seem important to you, and to hear them talk a little about their own work and how they go about supervising. The interviews will occur in the week after New Year's this year, the first full week of January, and they will be complete by the 8th of January for the admissions meeting, which happens sometime in the week or 10 days following the interview deadline. And then finally, initial application outcomes come quite quickly. You will be notified of the outcome of your application sometime in February. Now, before we get any further, that'll simply be a notice of whether you've been admitted, or for whatever reason you haven't been admitted on this occasion, together with some feedback, we hope, and whether your admission is complete and unconditional, or whether it's conditional on things like completing your MA or finishing a language requirement or something like that. But conditional MA or conditional admissions are usually confirmed by early summer once you've completed whatever program you're currently involved in. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my slides. Funding is a really, really important part of a PhD. Some people don't need funding, but for the vast majority of us, we need financial support to go through a PhD. There are three primary ways students are funded in the UK and at the Courthold. The first is through Quartaled Scholarships. These are grants generally given on the basis of application and subject to available funds. They are limited, and so they are competitive, but they seek to give partial, usually, support to students for their tuition and living needs. The largest pool of grants we generally have are the government grants, the grants given by the UK research bodies. In our case, our so-called grant body is called CHASE, and we are a consortium of institutions in London and Southeast England that together run a funding program that gives scholarships to students. Now, you may have heard of CHASE before and have heard in the past that they were only available to home or EU students. This year, for the first time, CHASE scholarships are available to all students, home and international. EU and international are now the same thing. So they're available to all students. Funding levels vary depending on the type of CHASE award that you receive, and they range from anywhere from partial tuition and stipend up to full tuition and stipend. But all grants now include a stipend. And then finally, there is something called a collaborative doctoral award. Collaborative doctoral awards are sort of special scholarships that are advertised either by major arts institutions like the British Library, the British Museum, or the Tate, or the wherever. You might keep an eye out for CDAs that are advertised outside of the Courtauld. But then they're also offered occasionally by the Courtauld if one of the faculty members at the Courtauld proposes such a thing and it is awarded. And those happen in a separate round and a separate round of applications, and they're advertised, I think, in January. But Alex, when we come to Q&A, can confirm that timing for me. And so CDAs aren't predictable, and you can't go out and seek them. You can't approach a supervisor and say, could we propose a CDA? Rather, you have to wait and see what CDAs come on the market and then see if one fits you and one sounds of interest. And then I think the last slide, I'm not 100% sure of that, but we'll go with maybe the last slide, I wanted to tell you about is a little bit more about what happens afterwards. Obviously, a really big part of career advancement in the arts and the humanities is your own personal seeking out of opportunities, but the Courtauld also wants to and can play a really big role in helping support you in that effort. The first way, of course, is through your supervisor, who provides letters of reference and career advice of a variety of sorts. But we also have a careers office that offers appointments, consulting appointments with a career counselor, offers practice interviews, which are of indescribable importance when they come. I can only tell you that I would have done even worse in my first interview than I did if I had not had a good practice interview. A whole variety of online resources, the Courtauld Insert Careers program, and then a whole variety of open house events with various employers and industry connections that help you build the networks that you may rely on in seeking future career paths. And then finally, some more information on how to reach out to us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on our website. And also, probably I should have added to this slide a email address that you will know probably already by heart, but is pgadmissions@courthold.ac.uk. Again, that's pgadmissions.courthold.ac.uk. Now, I think that is going to be the end of my slides. And so in reasonably good time for me, I'd like to stop and hand it over to you for questions. And welcome also Alex. Hey, Alex, how you going?
Hi, hey, how's it going?
This again is Alex Hawkins, who's the head of admissions. Maybe he'd like to say more about himself before we go on to questions.